Hello and welcome to our podcast today, which is with the lovely Emily. And let me just introduce a little bit about Emily herself, and then we'll talk a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. So Emily was trained as a biochemist, and she gained a BA and a PhD and followed a career in biochemical and immunological research for many years. Over the past 30 years, she has explored many healing modalities, running healing and talking circles, trained in energy work, which is Reiki, Touch for Health, Brain Gym, integrative body psychotherapy, philosophical soul-centered counseling, family and systemic constellations, trauma resolution through somatic experiencing, and pre and perinatal development. She has a private practice working with individuals, couples, families, and groups, and teaches body-focused self-awareness and healing and family and systemic constellation. And she facilitates workshops in family constellations too. And she brings a wealth of experience when working with clients and students in an empowering and holistic way. And so let's say a little bit more, though, about Emily. She is the father of 3 daughters on a transgender journey, and she's embodying a feminine expression. So these experiences, together with being raised as a child in the British colonies and indoctrinated violently into patriarchal attitudes in British boarding schools, have energized her exploration of the impact of patriarchy on enforcing gender stereotypes and the illusion of female inferiority that still pervades our developed Western cultures. So welcome, Emily. I'm so delighted. So some people already know that I did promise that we would do a podcast with you. So I'd already mentioned that. And one of the, let me just say a little bit of background about kind of how I discovered you, as if you weren't already discovered, but how I discovered you was that there was a wonderful article that you wrote called Patriarchy in the Constellation Field. And that really kind of spoke to me in the way that you looked at the field itself. And one would assume that we were kind of probably a little bit more aware of these things in this field, and yet there's this hidden part of it as well. And that really kind of touched me and felt very resonated with my experience of this field as well. And you also then wrote an article which people can find on LinkedIn, but I'll also connect people to this article as well, which was Releasing the Hounds of Patriarchy. What a wonderful, wonderful title for an article. So I really wanted you to talk more today and kind of share with us a lot more about kind of your journey, because it's a fascinating journey that you've been on in terms of life journey, really. I mean, you know, when we first met, kind of there's that connection as well with the boarding schools and the boarding school work that that I've been doing as well. So I would love for you to give us a little bit of a background about you and your story, and how you came to find yourself in kind of a field of working in constellations and healing work, I suppose.
I'll start with what really shifted my life, which was my elder brother, 4 years older, killed himself in 1987. And somehow broke a lot of the constraints in me. And woke up in a way to knowing that I have a soul in a way that I hadn't experienced before. And I started reading Carl Jung, and I've been told he's hard, but no, what he was writing about was, oh, I know this. This is what's happening. And having lots of visions and dreams that told me to start going in different directions. And that's how I went into all these healing modalities, many of them looking for people who could help with staying in touch with soul. And even the philosophical counseling, which is soul-based counseling, had a lot of good information, but really didn't connect me that way. So I constantly was looking for ways to really reconnect this lovely experience. And that took me to all the healing modalities. And as I look back, it was necessary. So I've learned a lot. And I've got to the stage now, I don't want to take any more trainings in healing type work. And yeah, an enormous amount. But what happened 4 years ago, I started having dreams telling me I was to go on a journey, and I won't go into the dreams now. I can feel it. And I thought, oh, dreams, I need to see a Jungian therapist. And luckily, I knew of one. I actually checked out other ones here in Edmonton, but she was the one that stood out. And a couple of people I know had also seen her. And I've been seeing her now for 4 years. And she has been instrumental in really helping me to uncover, desuppress really, this feminine female energy that is very beautiful and scary. It feels wonderful, but scary in terms of the outside world. That really is a calling. It's not my decision. I'm being invited into it constantly. And there's a lovely quote from Bernadette Roberts, I think her name is, wrote Self and No Self, and about her experience of touching into soul. And she said there's an old saying about the ox. I can't remember what it is, but what she's basically is saying is, it's not looking for spirit. Spirit is looking for us. Mm-hmm. And it's not, and so much of what I see in cults is people are looking outside for the answer rather than actually listening for it inside. And that's been my experience since, that this is informing, literally informing me and this journey. And it's brought me more into a different way of looking at gender and sex, and really differentiating gender, masculinity, femininity, and sex, male, female, and the other in between intersex expressions, which I didn't know about, and finding good definitions of what is masculine and what is feminine took a long time. There's some, what's her name? Bell Hooks, Carol Gilligan in particular, and some of the feminist writers, very clear about it, and how we are divided into these sex-based human qualities. We're all split in our conditioning as early children, very early children, from 2 or so. Even then, boys and girls are also monitoring each other in a lot of cases. So it's a very deep, deep conditioning in all the people I know, definitely in me. So that's where I am now, and to see how our cultures are patriarchal cultures, which we are all in, the Western world, really constantly enforces. And now we see with the Supreme Court decision in the UK and the executive order in the States that this is being reinforced. The subtitle to that article is Enforcing the Sex Binary Again. And in the States, rampantly happening, viciously, cruelly happening. And wanting to explore that and support healing between men and women, and really to support, strangely now, men. I say strangely because I don't see many men professionally, that many are lost. And that's why I see them going towards these misogynistic movements. So both and then the other part of transgender with the history, which also I've learned a lot about more recently over the last few years, is it really, over 6,000 years ago, men expressing, celebrating the goddess, the female energy in creation, which our culture again denies. The only one in the Christian church is Mary, sort of, but it's very, very male oriented. I mean, the church, Catholic Church anyway. That also to support, coming back to that, inviting that back into our world. And I know it's happening in certain places. I have my wife's sister ran goddess, what are they called? Gatherings, big ones. And she was saying one or two men came and were deeply touched by it, transformed them. And by keeping women inferior, which patriarchy does systemically, in science as well, most science, medical science, doesn't include women as part of the science. A man is the human, the natural human, not a woman, often left out of medical research. I've lost my thread. So to support that in men, to honor the female, that's why I was so horrified by the Supreme Court decision, and the Women for Scotland, was it, who needed this definition out of fear of some transgender males to females abusing women, which I think is valid, but not to make another opposition and to not really honor women and those who support women. So a lot of transgender is really supporting women and the creative energy.
Yeah. So I mean, this chart here, this model here, is something that you put in your article on the releasing the Hounds of Patriarchy. And I thought it was a really lovely model that kind of connects, because one of the things I think certainly when we've spoken previously that really registered and resonated with me was this connection to spirit and soul, and your work is soul work.
Yep.
And this kind of concept of it going beyond our identities as male and male and female. And this one you is from the Cree people you mentioned. Do you want to say a little bit more? I loved I love that. That's why I put that saying up. This is again is from your article, but sex is an expression of spirit, and I just love that idea of it of that connection to spirit, because we very rarely connect those things together.
So that's quite long. Part of what happened after my brother died, killed himself, I was looking for something more, something different. And I was drawn to the indigenous world, and didn't know how to enter. And through seeing an indigenous paper called The Wind Speaker, I think at the time, there was an opportunity to join a talking circle. And I talked to the elder, and eventually went to one. And through them, I got to see a different way of looking at the world. And it's very hard to explain to other people because it has to be experienced.
Mm.
The circle is such a big part of the native world, if I can use that word. Never quite sure what's politically correct anymore. And everything's always in fours. So here we have four circles, or four directions in the medicine wheel.
Mm.
Very equal. So here we are, here I am at these circles, and the elder starts talking about her troubles in her life now. And I go, oh, because I'm taking counseling training, and I'm not allowed to answer questions like that, about me. Totally different. I had a session with an elder from the Navajo one time, and afterwards he said, well, when you're around me, come to my home. Your home is my home. My home is your home. This is totally against all the rules I was learning. Very, very different and very relational. And all the sweat lodges I've been to are really family affairs. There isn't the hierarchical structure that I was used to. And the elders are respected, but I've yet to hear an elder call themselves an elder. They're very, very humble. There's one training I went to where the elder would say the opening prayers and pass around the smudge. And then, so I'm sort of in awe of him. And then we sit down, and I had lunch with him one time. He was just free at a table. We start talking about changing the generator in his Ford Ranger truck. He's just down to earth. There's nothing false about him. It's really lovely to see that. And they have struggled so much, and they're coming back. They're a lovely example of a different way of doing things and reclaiming their lands here. They're really reclaiming themselves without our Western world forcing itself on them. They refuse. They'll take help, but not sort of uninvited help.
Mm.
Because the Western world has lots of ideas of how they should do things.
Mm.
So
I was particularly kind of struck when in our previous conversations about how because you're on this trans journey, you're coming from a place of it, to use your terms, if you're a man, you have kind of privilege,
yes.
and so on, and therefore then kind of what that's like to suddenly kind of starting to be more recognized as a female in the feminine way, like what that then is like in terms of the way that you're met in the world, and so on. And so your lens on that I found very, very interesting. And I think I just want to kind of quote one of the things that you said in your article about the constellations field, and you said, in what ways do we unconsciously perpetuate dominance dynamics, including sexism, racism, elitism, and authoritarianism? Yeah, and I just thought that was such an amazing question. In what ways do we unconsciously perpetuate these dynamics? And I don't think, in my experience, and I know you're in agreement with this, it isn't just happening kind of by men. Women are part of that as well. I think one of the things that people seem to think about when we think about patriarchy, we automatically think of it as a male thing, not necessarily kind of an energy or or a way of being. It's almost like, oh, that when you're talking about patriarchy, you're talking about men. It's like, no, we're not. And I think it's like it's in the system, and how does it operate in the system? And often we don't see it for that reason, because we don't see in the we don't necessarily, we're not necessarily conscious that it doesn't just come from males or even females. It's in the system itself.
A lot of this, I mean, this article started with this committee. I'm on the JEDI committee for the North American Systemic Constellations. So JEDI is justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, the very opposite of what Trump is doing. And we, with a particular colleague there, Deborah, for some years now, we've been looking at power dynamics in constellations, and even the shape of how a constellation workshop or training is set up. Very clearly here in Indigenous circles, they are complete. They are a circle. Many circles in the Western world are horseshoes. The facilitator and the client are separated from the circle. It makes a difference. It makes those people more important, or it makes the facilitator more important. The structure, our physical structures have an enormous effect. And so with Deborah, we've looked at quite a lot of this. She did, I couldn't go to a conference, but she did a workshop on this at a conference of the structures, like a theater structure and a stage, a pulpit in a church. These, they're higher. They say I'm more important. And I don't see that in the Indigenous world here at all. So it's, to me, they're great teachers of a different way of being in relationship. And it's all about relationship. I mean, this circles is the third circle is family. This is, and then nation. We are all part of something bigger. I mean, a nation in here means the people, because there are lots of different nations here now. They're all Indigenous, have some different understandings, but a lot of similarities. So that's the way they describe it. Mm-hmm. But all about relationship.
And you mentioned in your the article on releasing the Hounds of Patriarchy about the way, the history, the way that these Indigenous communities view the trans world, the transgender, transsexual. Do you want to say a little bit more about that? Because of course we have in the Western world have a very different view of it than they do.
I think it was someone who wasn't Indigenous coined the phrase two-spirit. Those who are both. And what I've learned is often they're culturally very important, socially very important. And if there's a gathering and it's sort of weighted more female or weighted more male, they'll bring a transgender person, two-spirit person in to help balance the energies, because they are different. And they have a very important function in the culture, which we don't have. Many, just going back to shamans in other parts of the world, and many of them are very feminine. And Gandhi was very feminine. It's a different way of looking at the world and really not forcing. It's, again, waiting. The feminine energy is more receptive and waiting than the masculine one, which is more aggressive and push, which we need both. So, I don't know any indigenous two-spirit people at the moment. I just know about it. And I would not call myself two-spirit because that's really reserved for indigenous people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But being able to see it through that, a different representation, is incredibly powerful for the whole.
Yeah. Well, it shows there's a different way of changing things, and to see them changing their relationship with our government, our administration, after many years of suppression of all their ceremonies and ways of being, is really incredible to watch. And they're doing it in a very peaceful way, mainly through litigation. It doesn't have to be, and this is what Gandhi did too, chose a different way of dealing with the British Empire in India. There's Audre Lorde, the title of her book is The Master's Tools Cannot Demolish the Master's House. It needs to be a different way of approaching this, not to set up this opposition yet again between men and women. And that women then become more scared of men.
Yeah. I know one of the things that I kind of noticed in our work, in the elders work that we're doing, and I use that term as a function, not as an identity. So
Yes.
it's almost, this is what we're doing. The work we're doing is kind of in the eldership space, really. So the eldership business school that I have running is very much around, how do we do our work in the world, and how do we, work with each other to be able to do that work and support each other in that work and so on, in terms of, offering, raising awareness to the function of elders in society, because we just don't have that function. It seems to have been completely lost, and I would probably say that part of that is the patriarchy, if not all of it is to do with the patriarchal. It's to, because of course when we get to an elder state, it isn't, we're not identified any longer as kind of as female and male as such. It's like the function is eldership and eldering. There isn't, because obviously women no longer are looking after children or are having children and so on as well. So it's like it puts it in everybody on a kind of a different kind of playing field as such. But this kind of idea that how do we kind of do this eldering work in a way that goes beyond this masculine and feminine, and if anything, kind of connecting it together. And that's the journey for me, that I've just kind of realized within eldering. It is that sacred marriage. It is the connection of the paradoxes and the polarities, and those things actually finding a way of being in relationship to each other in a way that we've not had before.
You mentioned before, if it's okay, about a class or training you had about elders, and it became important for some of the people that they could name themselves as elders.
Yeah.
Yeah, an identity And I watched that podcast you did with Tad Hargrave. He also mentions this about taking on an identity. And what I hear in that with the people who took that identity on is it becomes authoritarian, becomes, I'll tell you what to do. My experience with elders here, I've never heard that. I have one example. I wanted to hold talking circles in Cree tradition. So I talked to a couple of elders. One said, "So how do you feel?" So I said, "This is how I feel." And another one said, "So how else are the teachings to be passed on?" So it's not about me. That really touched me and went, wow, this is in my fantasies. I was going to have the biggest healing circles and everyone was going to heal and all want to come. But it's not about that. It's about passing the teachings on, which is a very different way of looking at it. And I had a friend who was being Cree, lovely man, who was being chased by a woman. And he was very tempted. And he went to an elder and said, "This is what's happening." And the elder said, "Yeah, it's very hard, isn't it?" That was it.
Yeah.
And he didn't succumb.
Yeah.
He was married.
Yeah.
So it's a very different way of teaching. All the teachings are very, they're not, this is how to do it. The sort of models that sort of grow, they're like seeds. It is very different from our authoritative way of teaching.
Yeah, and it feels like to me kind of culturally that we've done a lot of talking about different kinds of ways of being in the world culturally, and we've gone through all sorts of different models of the ways of leading and all this kind of stuff. But I think what often does kind of where it's almost like a default position back to authoritarianism. Really, it's almost like we've not really let go. We've not really let go of that. It's almost like, and then of course, if all else fails, we go back to authoritarianism, which is almost like we kind of just going back there anyway, because it seems to be the fastest way of getting to where we need to get to, or getting things done or whatever. And again, it's almost like that. It reminds me of that kind of lone hero stuff that we tend to go, where the hero themselves still sees themselves as not part of anything. That somehow they're beyond that. They're this, that superhero thing. We're still kind of stuck in that kind of mythology in a way. Still, where we all genuinely believe that if somebody stands up there and says something that we think is a good thing, that they must know what they're doing and how to do it.
They will save us.
And they will save, obviously, yes.
Just look at all even from my childhood, Superman, Batman, all these, and I think they've multiplied now. X-Men, I don't know much about them, but these are all these saviors. They're all savior stories. Looking for someone else to rescue us. A single person,
Yeah. Well, I was brought up, even though we were in the UK, on John Wayne movies.
Yeah.
So that kind of, lone hero on a horse completely saves the day. Yeah. So we seem to be still very attached to that idea, really, as well.
And you mentioned about women being part of patriarchy, which they are, and I mentioned that in that article. I love that expression from bell hooks, patriarchal men in drag. But also men who want to change it are unconsciously also repeating it. And I gave two examples of that. One, the final piece, what was it? Cooperation needs to outcompete competition. I mean, this quite weird expression that of reinstating competition. And one woman I know who was married to an elder here, she's Danish, with Danish background, wrote a book about it, and her husband said, we didn't know anything about competition before the white people came. It was brought in, and many, there's another lovely example in, I think, somewhere else in the world, of introducing running races into a indigenous culture. So the children start running, they get to the line, and the first one waits, and then the next one waits, and they all wait till all of them have come to the line. They hold hands and cross the line together. Such a different way of looking at the world. Competition really sets this up of, again, the binary, a winner and loser.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you have any sense of where your work is going now, your soul work is going?
Very interesting question. As writing that article helped, and that it's somehow, and the challenge is to really present myself as transgender. And I need to say it that way, to be able to speak authentically from this place, from this experience. I see it as a healing move. I see it transgender as really healing of a binary. And a lot of transgender people I know refuse to buy into the binary, refuse even to have the pronouns. I don't want to be this or that. I'm somewhere in a spectrum. I don't want to be pigeonholed. And I think that's very accurate, very helpful. The other part is being male to female, particularly older. We've been conditioned as men, and we carry with us the privilege of men, and it's still in us. And a friend of mine said this, that one of the problems she sees, she knows a lot of transgender, is transgender males to females still act as if they own the world in the same way that many men do. It's not really a shift into the feminine. Because a lot of healing, sort of later healing in life is to, as you've mentioned, is to integrate both masculine and feminine qualities. We're not held by one or the other. We have access to all of humanity, human qualities. So there's that danger as well of not really integrating the feminine into the transgender experience.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. And that's what I heard someone else said he would never, or she now would never call herself a woman, because we don't go through the conditioning women went through. We don't go through the biological, puberty, menstruation, menopause, none of those, having births. We don't go through any of that. And I've learned from my actually a nephew and a grandchild, both at the age of about 5, crying when they realized they couldn't have babies, these boys. In many ways, there's an envy of women, this creative energy, bringing forward life. It's not a penis envy of women, it's actually this other energy of life-giving.
Yeah.
And men, males, we cannot have, even as transgender, we don't have the possibility of experiencing that. Many women don't, or don't want to, but the potential's there. It's not in any male.
Well, I've never heard it described that way before, but that, yeah. And so therefore then do you see it in a way, being transgender um is another form of identity. And I hate using those words, but rather than kind of going, oh, you're going to be in a woman now.
I would say now, I don't like the word identity too, because then that locks things.
Yeah.
I would say expression. No, I found that a better way, for me anyway, to name what's happening, because the
Yeah.
expressions can change too.
That's mm,
So yes, and I sort of refer to it a little bit in that article. Um, there needs to be, well, it's partly the legislation there in Britain and elsewhere, to make room for people who do not fit into either binary, and there's space for them. This, of course, is in the washrooms particularly, and changing rooms. But there needs to be physical changes in the social structures. And I think this is true in England, certainly here in Canada, or well, where I am, all the washrooms are now wheelchair accessible, all the public washrooms. There are open spaces to go in, and I think probably in England too. It got changed. It is possible to change, but it needs that needs changing at a political level.
yeah. And at a society level as well, I think I love the fact that you talk a lot about women not feeling safe with men.
Yes,
Therefore, then, you know, c- coming up with ideas or views about things to make women safe, but not necessarily then addressing what the issue is.
right.
You know what I mean? As in, like, well, actually, they're not safe, so let's deal with that. Instead
Well,
of going, how do we help someone become safe? Is almost like, well, actually, instead of kind of going, how do you protect yourself? Saying, well, why do you not feel safe? Like, what is it? What do we need to do around that? That's the issue.
very much so, and it's still in the justice system. Women who are raped are blamed, and the Defense Council attacking women for being the cause of the problem.
Yeah.
And why didn't you fight? And all very good reasons, but it's the woman's fault, not the man. And we're not looking at the social constructions that allow this to happen.
Mm.
So, I mean, constantly, it's yeah.
Mm. And what I see in what you're bringing, Emily, is this culture making space. So I think for me, one of the things within eldership is
Okay.
culture making. So, I think I like that term culture making rather than because obviously years ago we talk about, and some people still call it this culture change. And that's still kind of going, well, we're working off the old premise and redefining it or 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 even cultural transformation going making it look completely different. But it's almost like we're still taking something as it was instead of culture making, instead of what are we creating here? What's kind of emerging and being called to emerge in this space? And so kind of from where you're coming from now, I can, in this soul space and the work that you're doing in constellations and everything as well, is I can see some new culture, that culture making happening through you and through this experience that you're going through as well.
I think there's a great danger of um, trying to make a new world. I mean, there's so many examples of it. Um, there was a German facilitator who came here, Dietrich Vett. He's unfortunately died now. And one of the things he said quite a few times in the workshops was, there's nothing more dangerous than a good idea. Because often it's without context. And I was involved a bit with the international development field. I was married to a woman who was very active in it. And I got to see how ideas would be presented by Europeans into Africa, for instance, that had no idea what was going on. Very nice, very helpful, but actually caused a lot of problems. And there's a book, I think I mentioned it in that patriarchal, the patriarchy in the constellation field, a book by John Moorhook, Utopian Legacies. We see so much of that. People have this wonderful idea, and then it gets taken over by authoritarian energies. So can a soul calling keep happening? And you use the word emerge, which to me is much more important than anything else, that it's not anyone's particular idea. It's an energy that wants to happen. It's systemic. It's not personal. It's not anyone's. Doesn't need a leader.
Yeah, I love that quote that you used from his book. That was excellent.
Yeah. So there are a lot of dangers in this. Well, MAGA, Make America Great Again, typical, destroying many lives to create the perfect world for certain people. This has been going on. Hitler's Nazi Germany, all of these are utopian Germany that doesn't have Jews, etc.
Yeah. And I suppose there is still this kind of sense that there is a vision of this utopian vision that we need to make into reality, rather than working with what's actually emerging, what is being called into being.
And I mean, one of the big things in Hellinger's orders of love is one he doesn't mention as an order of love is acknowledging what is. Just see reality as it is. And that's partly what Deborah and I started, was start examining the constellation field, which doesn't look at itself. And it's now, I think, we're beginning, I believe there's more energy, but again, it comes from the marginalized people who see it. Gay people back, when they were fighting for all this, they got very clear about the structure of our cultures, our societies. It's people slightly outside or marginalized who get to really see what's happening. Because when we're in it, we don't, no, it's fine, of course, that's the way it is. And we will repeat it.
And do you think there's a kind of a sense that, if somebody's marginalized, that the answer then is to, I mean, I know in Constellation we talk about joining what's been separated.
Yes, yeah.
But sometimes, kind of, if we're not careful, that how much is the marginalized person adapting themselves to kind of belong, really, instead of in a way, I wonder how much it's a natural phenomena to have, kind of edge dwellers in society that kind of can see things that they're not kind of completely caught in. And I'd like to see the eldering space as being more like edge dwelling. And I know the shaman is the edge dweller within Indigenous communities.
Yeah, I remember you using the edge word earlier on in the previous. I think that's a lovely observation. Can we have edge dwellers without excluding them, vilifying them? Can we include them? Because you use also not belong, because there's a great danger in belonging as well. And Hellinger was very clear about that, about the conscience of belonging. We can do terrible things with a good conscience out of belonging to a particular group and excluding those who aren't in the group. Yeah, and with a good conscience, that's the big thing.
And I know kind of some of the work that you're doing around this Jedi work is to look at Bert Hellinger's.
Mhm.
You've mentioned that before in our conversations, to look at, where, if you like, there's those elements of maybe unconscious patriarchal that we've taken as, the principles of systemic work, when they're not necessarily the principles. People are kind of still being very loyal to things that maybe they're not recognizing as patriarchal elements within the field.
I would say so definitely. Hellinger himself, I've got a quote in the training manual saying, even the orders of love aren't permanent, everything changes. And there is the sense I get is that many people are trying to make them, as you said, principles then, which don't shift, they're just stuck. And we try and force, that's the other danger, of course, in psychology as well. We force people into a particular model of what a human is, and a model of how things are, rather than do what he said, which is phenomenological, actually see what shifts and what emerges. So I like the word emerged you use there too. It's comes out of whatever, I don't know how to describe that, but it has its own energy, again, if we're willing to wait and listen. Yeah, to let this come.
So you mentioned the beautiful quote from T.S. Eliot. Can you share that with us? And because I think it's a lovely note to end on as well.
Yeah, sure. I'll just preface this. I was in a fairly depressed state a little while ago. The work was going, business was very slow. And I came across this quote, which just settled me. It was like, wow, exactly. Something I already know in the work, but in life is a little harder. It goes like this. I said to my soul, be still. Wait without hope. For hope would be hope for the wrong thing. Wait without love. For love would be love of the wrong thing. There is yet faith, but the faith and the love and the hope are all in the waiting.
That's absolutely beautiful.
And then the right action can happen.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us on this podcast, Emily. And I wish you well on the journey, and I'll invite you back at some point to have another conversation about this to see where it's going. That's lovely. Thanks, Emily.
Well, and thank you. Zena, I almost forgot your name. Very bad with names. Thank you. I really appreciate the time to talk and also get a bit clearer again about where I'm going or where I'm being led. So thank you. And lovely to talk with you.